Hey, it's Jackie here from the Early Years Learning Hub. And before we get started, I wanted to let you know about our subscription option. If you're a fan of our podcasts and would like to see us continue to bring you interesting speakers on all of the topics you didn't even know you needed to hear about, as well as accessing some really great resources to help you put some of the ideas from the podcast into practice, then why not subscribe? It is great value at just $2.99 plus GST per month and is automatically debited from your bank account. Simply go to our website, Early Years Learning Hub, and click on the subscribe button. Welcome to another Early Years Learning Hub podcast. My name is Jackie Ward and I'm the founder and managing director of the Early Years Learning Hub. This episode is one of our practice sharing series where I invite teachers, educators and leaders to share their practice and tell us some of the things that they do that work for them. Today I'm joined by Ebony Birch-Hanger, Neuro-Sensory Education Specialist, and we'll be discussing how understanding neurosensory systems support teachers and educators to better support children to self-regulate. And this is a series of 4, and this is our final episode in the series. And the 4th episode will be unpacking how supporting the sensory systems is more effective than trying to manage big behaviours, maybe with some more traditional or common practices that we've used in the past. So I'm going to throw over to Ebony to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her professional journey. Over to you, Ebony.
Thanks, Jackie. I originally trained as an early childhood and primary teacher. Prior to that, I had recognised myself that I was quite drawn to individuals who behaved and interact differently with the world. So those who didn't quite fit the mould, who were different from the majority. And I found that I was, even at an early age, I was able to relate really easily to those individuals and even guide them. So I began working in childcare settings and primary schools, but I quickly realised I wasn't able to support the children I wanted to in the way that I wanted to within the systems and resources that were available in those settings. So I opened my own centre and I ran group and private sessions for individuals with a wide variety of diagnoses, medical conditions, the majority who were considered to have quite complex behavioural, sensory and communication profiles. And then I went and completed additional training in special education, deaf education and neurodevelopmental therapy, and worked as a consultant in various educational settings from early childhood right through to TAFE level. It was really when I was working in my own centre and I was running music and movement, speech and language, auditory processing training and full educational programs that I refined my values and my beliefs and really developed the approach that I use and teach to others today.
That's amazing. As I've said before, probably every episode, I love to hear the passion and enthusiasm that you've taken that interest and area further and, thought about ways that you could better support probably even more people than you could have if you were actually just in charge of one class in a classroom. That's amazing. All right, so given this is the 4th in our series, I thought if, because there's maybe potentially a gap between people listening, so just having a little recap. Very first episode was all about giving an overview of, your approaches and how they work. And you spoke about the 3 pillars of your approach, working out why approach. So could you just give our listeners a quick little refresh on what those 3 pillars are and why they're so important?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at behaviour and I have a child in front of me and I'm trying to work out why they're displaying a certain behaviour, I'll evaluate essentially 3 aspects. And the first one is the nervous system. So what state is their nervous system in? I then look at the environment, which is what we spoke about last episode, which includes not just the things and objects, but also the people, the routines and the expectations. And then I also look at the sensory systems. So how are the sensory systems of the body and the processing systems of the brain functioning in that particular moment, and combine the information I gain from all those elements to help me work out why and what supports I need to put in place for the child.
I love that multi-pronged approach, looking at different things from different perspectives. So this episode, we're all about the importance of the sensory systems. So what role do sensory systems have in supporting or escalating behaviours? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so as mentioned briefly in the last episode, the functioning of the sensory systems contributes to the internal state of a child. So if we have a child in this particular moment who has a baseline of regulation, whose sensory systems are functioning at optimal capacity, the input they receive from the environment can still change their internal state. If then we have a child who already has a baseline of stress in this particular moment, so if their sensory systems are already overloaded, overwhelmed, and are under stress, and that can come not just from in the environment, but it can come from illness or fatigue or hunger, or maybe they've had a stressful event, maybe something happened at home before they arrived at the centre. Then we add environmental input on top of that stress that their body's already experiencing, and that will change their state even further, and it will result in greater dysregulation. So I'm not just talking about the 5 senses that most people are aware of, your sight, your hearing, your touch, your taste. I'm also thinking and looking at things like the vestibular system, proprioceptive system, interoception. They're terms that listeners may or may not be familiar with, but there are other senses other than our standard 5 that most people are aware of. And I'll just quickly, just very briefly talk about the vestibular system, because that is linked to emotional regulation. So once the vestibular system is overwhelmed and feeling stressed, it's going to try and the body's going to try and compensate in various ways. And emotional regulation is impacted, and those compensatory behaviours that the system's trying to do, that's what we're going to see. That's the dysregulation that we're going to see because the vestibular system is stressed. And without going into too much detail about that system, it is the system that basically controls all the other systems in the body. It's like the coach of all of the sensory systems. So when that system is stressed, all of the other sensory systems in the body are impacted, and that's when we're going to see dysregulation from children.
Wow, that's very interesting. And I guess people can do a little bit more research on those if they're interested. But I remember when my eldest son was first born, and I used to take him to Kindy Jimbaroo, and they talked a lot about the vestibular stimulation and the importance of movement to encourage, that sort of the ear fluids to move all around. And I became quite interested in there. And I'm guessing too that's the connection between why movement is so important, because it connects to that vestibular stimulation as well when we're talking about giving children movement breaks is a really important way to support them, I guess, to self-regulate as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So sensory responses, how do I identify each child's sensory responses? Because I can imagine everyone's is different. Is it something that we should be looking for in all children? And I feel like this has become such an important sort of thing for us to note and observe. Like it's, we think about sensory stuff now way more than I did way back, when I was first teaching, like it seems to be something that's sort of, I guess, in the forefront of our mind. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So it's definitely something we want to be looking at in all children, because all children have sensory systems, and therefore all children have sensory responses. So we do want to look for it in all children. But the sensory systems and nervous systems of neurodivergent children are already working overtime, just by existing, because the world is not designed for neurodivergent individuals. So neurodivergent children, their systems are already working overtime. They are already under more stress. So it is even more important to be aware of this aspect in the neurodivergent population. So what can you do to, you mentioned identifying the sensory systems. Unfortunately, today there's not time for us in a podcast episode to go into great detail. I do a 3-hour workshop just on the sensory system, so it's really in depth. But what can you do as a start? Utilize the information you're given. So if you are given information from an occupational therapist, for example, about a particular child, utilize that information. Attend workshops, learn from others, do some more professional development in this area so that, when you are receiving reports or you're receiving information from families or you're just observing things in the environment, you think, oh, I can tell there's something there related to the sensory systems and how that child's body is feeling at this moment. I'm not quite sure what it is. So just upskilling in this area is a great way to be able to become more confident with this. But I'll just give an example for each. So, if we're looking at a child who is requiring a lot of movement, we mentioned the vestibular system before. Children's bodies are really intelligent. They have this innate intelligence that we often lose as adults or minimize as the older we get. So a really great thing is to look at what children are already doing. And so, if a child is moving around a lot, they're requiring some vestibular activation. They're moving because their body and their brain is telling them to move. Yeah. If you see a child who's not wanting to touch certain things or who's doing a lot of touching, that's obviously the tactile system. Yeah. That's easy to identify. If you have a child who is moving away from certain spaces or covering their ears or making lots of noises themselves, that's probably a sign that their auditory system is overwhelmed. Yeah, it's too noisy in the environment for them. If you're looking at a child who is, again, moving away from spaces or who seems quite, their attention is moving from one thing to the next, they're not staying in the one space, that might be because they're visually overstimulated. There's too much visual stimuli. There's things catching their eye in the environment, and there's just that they don't know where to put their focus, and their body's becoming dysregulated because of that. So we've sort of got the auditory, we've got the tactile, we've got the visual, and then smells. It can just be children, again, moving away. Moving away is a great sign. If you see children moving away from anything, that's their sensory system overwhelmed. But you sometimes have children also who are seeking out a lot of smells. So there might be children who aren't just doing your, usual, oh, that's interesting, I'll smell that, but who are constantly smelling things and seeking that sensory input. So there's signs without even knowing, a great detail about the sensory systems that you can look and observe and say, okay, that's a sensory behaviour. Something's happening with that child, and you don't need to know any more than that in that moment. That's when you go to use all the other information we've already talked about and look at ways that you can support the child's regulation in that moment.
I love that. Yeah. It's really about being very targeted in your observations, isn't it? Saying, I'm looking for these sorts of behaviours, or I've noticed this, I'm going to now look for more context with that. Does that happen in other circumstances and whatnot? I love that idea, because I think, assessment and planning is something that a lot of people really struggle with. But in actual fact, we're doing it all the time. We don't always write all of that stuff down. But in this case, it would be a really great thing to do, because therefore you can then write it down as part of your planning to say the things that you're going to adjust. It's a reasonable adjustment that you're making to support including that child in the program. Love it, love it, love it, love it. Okay, so the next thing we're talking about is reflecting on your own influence. So I included this because I think sometimes it's really hard for us to critically reflect on our own practice, to be that really self-aware and be really aware of our own worldviews and our own experiences and things. Sometimes it can be really hard to do that as a teacher and be sort of stand a step further back to sort of say, well, how is my own, non-neurodiverse approach influencing what I'm doing and what I'm planning and how I'm implementing things. So I've come a roundabout way to say, what are your thoughts on that idea of, your own influence? I mean, you talked about already in our previous episode things about your person and what you've made adjustments there. So you've obviously done some of that critical reflection yourself to think about the way these things that you do are going to be perceived. So can we chat a little bit about the teacher's influence, I guess, in the scenario?
Yeah, so look, it is really difficult to identify, and this is something I've become more aware of over time, and just by working with a number of different professionals, by hearing about the ways that they talk about, situations they've found challenging with children they're working with. I've realised it is very difficult for others to identify the experience of sensory overwhelm, for example, if you haven't experienced it yourself. Now, for me, it's never been difficult because I have sensory sensitivities. I have a system that responds very strongly to sensory input. Already being autistic myself, my sensory systems pick up things that other people don't pick up. And so I've never had the difficulty of not being able to understand what a child in front of me is experiencing. I see a behaviour and I go, that's what it is. It's that. And that comes in with the environmental evaluation as well. I can very easily evaluate an environment because I can walk into a room and I can see 50 things that is overstimulated. So I know that they're contributing to the dysregulation of the children in that environment. So, and I've heard from others when I've had conversations with, other teachers or educators, and I've given them some examples of stimuli or the way that an environment is set up that may be contributing to dysregulation. And the frequent response is just, I've never even thought about that. I never even look at that. I've never even considered that. And why would they? Because it's not bothering them. It's not causing change in their internal state. It's not causing dysregulation within their system. So it can be very challenging. What I encourage educators to do, and everyone listening today, is to draw on your own experiences. So you will have one. It might be something, a little bit more extreme. For example, you're at a lunch one day, you might be out with family or friends, and you're at a lunch, and someone orders something that has a really strong smell. Maybe it's a really strong fish or something, and you're sitting right next to them. And you just, oh gosh, that's strong. So everyone will have an example like that. It might be you've been present when someone's run their fingernails across a blackboard. Those more extreme examples. But think about that. Find an example you have from your own experience. And go, oh yeah, okay, I remember what that felt like. Okay, I can understand now how that made my body feel different, that made my body jump or react. And then put that into the context of the children you're working with, but realise that it doesn't have to be stimuli that is that strong or that extreme. It can be something very, very minimal. All of the things that you're not noticing, that your system doesn't pick up, could be causing dysregulation for a child whose system is more sensitive to stimuli. But start with your own experience, find one, remember what that felt like, and then be really aware of all of the things in an environment and just question yourself and think, how might that thing over there that's not bothering me, how might it bother someone else?
So true. And I've done a lot of that. I've probably become a little bit more sensitive to stimuli as I've gotten older, or maybe it's once you see it, you can't unsee it. That idea of once I kind of thought about, environments, early childhood classrooms in particular, but any classroom, I think there's a lot of stuff up all the time, isn't there? Everyone's version of this is up, and there's paintings and pictures everywhere. And in my service, we used to put them up on the windows, which I never liked the look of the blue tack from the outside. And also we had this beautiful view out both windows to these beautiful trees, which I thought was really calming and peaceful, yet we're then putting all these pictures up everywhere. And so I think, just that idea of just thinking about it and looking around and taking a minute to go, how is that, a bit of a sensory overload, and the noise as well. I'm much more sensitive to noise as I've gotten older as well. So I'm always mindful of that and adjusting for that. But yeah, I do think it's really important for us to think about, even if it isn't affecting us, what else could it be? But also to your point about the fish too, I was thinking then too, and if it is a strong smell and you are really affected by it, then you can't really enjoy the meal, or you can't really get into the deep conversation, can you? So if you think about that for applying it with children, and then their inability to do any deep learning is now compromised, isn't it? Because they're too impacted by that sensory experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, as we have with our other episodes, what are some targeted approaches? So again, that practical, what can I implement tomorrow kind of things with this? I mean, I feel like we've given lots of examples already.
I think in this episode we've kind of weaved them in. They've sort of come out in my responses to the questions already. So I will just say, I will just add on. I spoke about look at what the child is already doing when I gave some examples before. I also want to add trust children's responses. Trust what children are telling you. Trust what children are showing you. And treat their responses as valid. You may not be feeling what they are feeling, but they are feeling something. Children don't demonstrate a behaviour for no reason. Every single behaviour, you often hear the phrase behaviour is communication. And I 100% agree with that, wholeheartedly. It's not just communication though, it's a response. Behaviour is a response to something. If a child is just demonstrating a behaviour, no matter whether it's a big, loud, explosive behaviour or those quiet, withdrawn, internalised behaviours, which we need to remember because sometimes people forget about those.
Yeah.
The behaviour is a response to something. Otherwise, the behaviour wouldn't be occurring. So trust what you're seeing. When you are seeing dysregulation or a behaviour in a child, there is a reason for it. The child is responding to something. And that's where we want to, I guess the best way to wrap up is to, if I tie everything in together that we've spoken about, that's then we come back to us, we bring it back to us and we think about everything we've spoken about. think about the nervous system. What state is their body in right now? Is it in, terms people will be familiar with, is it in a fight or flight state? Is it in a freeze state, that shutdown state? What cues of safety or threat is this child possibly receiving right now? And then, okay, so now I'm going to widen my lens and I'm going to look at the environment. I'm going to look at the objects and the things. I'm going to look at the people. I'm going to think about our routines. I'm going to think about the way I'm interacting with these children at the moment. I'm going to think about the expectations that I'm placing on the child at the moment. How are all of those things in the environment either sending cues of safety or threat to this child, and that's what their nervous system is receiving. And then I'm going to widen my lens again, and I'm going to think about the sensory aspect. So yes, we've got those 5 senses, but we've also got, as I mentioned, the vestibular system. So that's the one for movement. So we're going to think about, does this child need more movement at the moment? Have they had too much movement and they need some rest? Look at what their body is telling us. Look at what they are already doing. As I say, upskilling a bit more in the area of sensory regulation is great because it really can help you to determine the next best step if you can identify more specifically what that child's body and brain might need in that moment. So we see what we see, and we start at the nervous system, we expand to the environment, we expand to the sensory systems. We just keep widening our lens. Trust what you see, trust your judgment, trust your instincts. They will get sharper the more and more you practice this and practice looking at all those different pillars. And then you use your information and knowledge of the child and you put it all together, and you'll find you'll be able to respond more compassionately and more keenly and with more benefit. You'll be able to choose the response that gives the child more benefit the more and more you practice these steps.
I love that. Such great tips. And I think the thing about this is when we do some learning in this space and when we put some energy in this space, it's a win for everyone, isn't it? Because the child has a better opportunity to learn and a more positive experience in their day. And educators also have less disruptive behaviours. They have, their day flows better. They have an opportunity to support learning better. So it's a win for everyone when we implement all of these strategies. I have so enjoyed having you on, Ebony, and what a great Neurosensory series we've done on these podcasts. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Say, Ebony?
No, I just think that, I just want to encourage the educators, so everyone who is listening, when you receive information such as this, it can make you feel like there's so much I don't know. That's just an opportunity to learn, and it's an opportunity to grow. And so just, go back and reflect. We've given a lot of information over these 4 episodes, and so go back and listen to them. Listen to the action steps at the end of each episode as many times as you need to, until it becomes second nature, and just look at it as a positive learning experience and an opportunity to develop and grow and, make your centre, as you say, enjoyable and a more beneficial experience for not only the children but for yourself as well. Because once you do these things as second nature, your job becomes easier.
That's amazing. And we'll make sure we have links to where people can get in touch with you, Ebony, and do any of your courses or anything that you might have mentioned throughout the podcast episodes. The Early Years Learning Hub also has some great courses that people might be interested to do, supporting children with a disability and or additional need, supporting children's behaviour and helping children to self-regulate. So I'll put the links to those in the show notes as well. Thank you again, Ebony, and we hope everyone has enjoyed listening to this series.
Thanks, Jackie.